This year's Patriots Day reenactment will be by far the biggest one yet. 200 to 250 reenactors are expected to pour into Arlington, which is sure to inflame the British beyond measure. They will be more than inflamed once the townsfolk greet the Brits on their way back to Boston. What exactly happened in the Battle of Menotomy, and why was the battle so significant? We take you back 249 years with the help of 3 noted Arlington historians.
Mid-April 1775, roughly 700 British Army regulars in Boston were given orders to capture and destroy colonial military supplies reportedly stored by the Massachusetts militia at Concord. Now, if they could capture Samuel Adams and John Hancock, complete thorns in the side of King George III, well, that would just be icing on the cake in this particular mission. The British began their trek late at night out of Boston, crossed the Charles River, and marched through Cambridge, then entered the village of Menotomy, now, of course, modern-day Arlington, to get to Lexington and eventually Concord, just 11 miles away. The Redcoats would suffer more casualties than they had anticipated on April the 19th, 1775, in the battles of Lexington and Concord. And since they only had 1 day's supply of food and ammunition, they abandoned the idea of capturing Adams and Hancock and began to hightail it back to Boston as soon as possible. To do that, they had to use the very same route on their return trip back to Boston. But after Paul Revere's warning just hours before, along with William Dawes, Samuel Prescott, and a host of other riders lost to history and the battles that had just occurred, it was game on as far as the colonials were concerned. They knew what the Redcoats were up to and continued to pour into Arlington from neighboring communities and the countryside. They would then wait for the exhausted Redcoats to march by. And what happened later in the day, right here along Massachusetts Avenue, would outdo the battles of Lexington and Concord in its sheer brutality.
If you want to walk in the battle footsteps, you start in Boston Harbor, you disembark in East Cambridge, you march to Harvard Square, then through today's present-day Arlington, all the way out Battle Road to Lexington and Concord, and then all the way back again. All of that 36 miles saw the battle unfold.
Lexington was really an accident. Concord was a skirmish, and it was really skirmishing until they got to the village of Menotomy, now Arlington. But really in Arlington is where it really developed into a full-scale battle. This is where the fighting really became very ferocious, very intense. It was of a scale that no one was expecting.
It went into people's popular consciousness as Lexington and Concord. 90 years later, Longfellow comes along and memorializes those two towns' role in it.
Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere on the 18th of April in 75.
And the story is set.
The battles at the North Bridge and at Battle Green and Lexington were hugely important, but they happened before all of the militias could get here. So they were humping to get here as fast as they could from Bedford, from Billerica, from all over the place. They were hiking in here, and this is where they were able to get before the British came back down the road. The British went up the road in the night. At dawn they were at the Battle Green, then they went out to the North Bridge to try to claim the arms that they thought were there, and then they started fighting their way back.
The Crown forces on their way back, every time they encountered resistance, they hoped it was the last set of resistance that they would receive.
The Royal soldiers were a real mixture. They were led by professional officers, some of whom had joined for military careers, some of whom had joined up just to further their own political standings. Lord Percy, probably the best soldier that George III had in all of North America, based upon his competence and his skill, his experience. Percy's troops, though, the majority of them were on their first deployment. They had never seen a shooting war. They had been encamped on the Common in Boston and drilling and getting bored. And wondering what they were there for. This was their first real march out into the countryside. There had been a couple before, but this was the long one. This was the one with a very clear objective. Find those traitors, Sam Adams, John Hancock. Find the guns and the ammunition they've been storing and the gunpowder. Find them, bring them back here, get back to Boston Harbor by dinner time.
And what happened is about the time they hit Menotomy, which was then where the countryside stopped and settled land started becoming clear again, well, that's where everybody was waiting for them. A great deal of the fighting. They were fighting all the way back, but the sort of pitched battle was really here. This is where they took the biggest hit.
More and more Minutemen would arrive, more and more militia would arrive, and the fighting took a more brutal scope and scale as it went. And by Arlington, it was very, very intense.
The battle in its entirety was publicized just as fast as the colonials here in Massachusetts could write up their version of the story and get it on a boat, a fast boat to London.
I think very important for people to understand that this is where it really went down.
By the time the exhausted Redcoats reached Menotomy on their return trip back to Boston, they considered anyone moving inside a home like this a sniper, and they would shoot to kill if necessary. Nearly every home left standing, especially along Massachusetts Avenue, sustained smashed windows, wrecked doors, and bullet-riddled walls. The Battle of Menotomy would later be described by some historians as a very horrific and murderous street fight. And after it was over on April the 19th, 1775, the air here in Arlington was thick with the smell of gunpowder. The wounded and dying were crying out in agony. It was now time to bury the dead. Massachusetts and the other colonies quickly learned the hellish realities of war on April the 19th, 1775. The British regulars who survived that day would not soon forget it. The Battle of Menotomy was over, but the Revolutionary War had just begun.
We're also told there will be civilian reenactors in this year's battle. They'll be easy to spot. They'll be out of uniform, of course, running for their lives. You'll be able to find all the events leading up to the reenactment on the Arlington 250 website. Visit arlingtonma.org/Arlington250. Again, that's visit arlingtonma.org/Arlington250.